the 5th day of Christmas, Moose celebrates his 100th episode, uniting the families of Dracula, Bram Stoker's great-grandnephew, Dacre, and Bela Lugosi's granddaughter, Lynne. Hello everyone, I am Billy Peck, otherwise known as Zombilly, and we are officially on the road to 5 years with the 100th episode of Moose's Monster Mash. These are big milestones for a podcaster. You hit 100 episodes, that's a big deal. You hit 5 years, that's a real big deal as well. That will be happening this upcoming Halloween season, October 2024. So when I say we are on the road to 5 years, get ready because Moose has all kinds of amazing things planned. And 100 episodes is just the start. Now I can go on and on and on. As you may know, if you've heard any of the 8 episodes that I have been on, that I can keep the story going forever. But I'm going to try and reel it in and just say that I am very proud of what Moose has accomplished with 100 episodes as part of this Moose's Monster Mash podcast and what he has done for himself in the entertainment industry. Congratulations on 100 episodes, and we will see everybody just around the corner for year 5 of Moose's Monster Mash.
Welcome, Horror Hounds, to, well, I guess a milestone episode of Moose's Monster Mash. This is, in fact, the 100th episode. So, you guys have listened to me for a while. For my 100th episode, I couldn't think of a better topic to bring up than to dive into why Dracula is the lasting monster. Why is Dracula the go-to monster in the Monsterverse? There's Dracula, there's vampires. Everything always goes back to Bram Stoker's Dracula, Bela Lugosi's portrayal of Dracula. And I couldn't think of anyone better, or anyone I would prefer to have come talk with me about this, than the co-creators of the Stokerverse and grandnephew of Bram Stoker, Dacre Stoker and Chris McAuley, and granddaughter of Bela Lugosi, Lynne Lugosi Sparks. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you for having us, Paul.
Absolutely.
Congratulations on the 100th show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're right. We got ground zero here, don't we, for monsters? So
Yeah.
You got the right people on board to brainstorm.
Yeah, this is really, I mean, this is a story that was published back in 1897. And here we are in 2023. And it's still relevant. There's still Dracula things coming out. I mean, Dacre, you and Chris are building, a Stokerverse with new Dracula content on the regular. You've written more Dracula books. So, I mean, you've kept that alive. Lynne, you've, through, licensing and things, you keep your grandfather's image of his portrayal alive. And what I've noticed, and I talked to Lynne briefly about this the other day, I'm losing my hearing in my right ear a little bit. And so I'm watching things with captionings now. And anytime somebody is portraying Dracula on TV, you'll see them whip the cape, whip the cape up. And the captioning says, imitates Bela Lugosi. Not imitates Dracula, it's imitates Bela Lugosi. So it astounded me that those two are so interwoven that is Dracula.
Mhm.
And here we are so many years later, and it still has like the strongest fan base of any monster or horror creation or literary creation aside from like the Bible. It's astounding.
Yeah. Yeah, it is quite amazing to think that my grandfather, who I never did get to meet, was able to take this literary character and personify it so well in his own unique way that people, even though they might not know his name, they associate his face with Dracula, even younger people. And that's, due to the fact that he has such a strong fan base. And over the years, people have just so kindly perpetuated his legacy through the fans magazines, Famous Monsters. Every year at Halloween, the movies are played everywhere, now streamed everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so the younger generation have also come to associate Bela Lugosi's name and face as Dracula.
Yeah, and if I may go a step farther, both in our own ways, as descendants of these two incredible people, Bram Stoker and Bela, who have given so much to literature, popular culture, and so on. I think we've both seen in over a century the image or the inspiration from our relatives go off in so many different directions, and that has positive and negative to it. In a positive way, it's really cool to see that something that was in our blood has affected the world in very positive, although horrific ways.
Yeah.
Get people just a fantasy world and that sort of thing. But it's interesting to see the impact that they've had. But sometimes that impact, and Lynne, you can speak to this, but you and I are out there trying also to sort of remind people of who the person was. In my case, it's minding who that creator was. And that's where my buddy Chris McAuley comes in. It's like, we've seen the vampire that Bram Stoker, he didn't start all vampires. Now that was John Polidori and Reimer and Le Fanu, and also the fact that vampires existed in a sense of reality, a perceived reality, people concerned about, from these superstitions and folklore. But we've seen these go off in so many directions. It's like we got to pull it back a little bit and let people know who this person was, that started this. But also in our case, who the Dracula was that Bram started, which is different even than your grandfather, and slightly more sophisticated, suave, debonair. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's like, I just think there's a feel and a desire to go back to the basics. Where did Bram get his information from? What inspired him? What was his Dracula like? He's certainly not like the ones that Stephanie Meyer created, these others. And again, there's nothing wrong with those. It's just, it's allowed the Dracula that we now understand that started it all, and then morphed into Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee and Jack Palance and all the others, has changed, which gives us a lot of fodder to go say, hey, all that's good, but you really want to know what it's like, because as 127 years later, McAuley and Stoker can kind of tell you some of the stuff that went into all of this, and where it came from, which I'm sure you sort of do in your own way. I know you've authorized a couple of, or maybe it's only one biography that's come out, and that's sort of exciting to unleash new information on new readers about who the guy was that started all this.
Yeah, I think, Paul, when we were talking the other day, I was thinking about, why is Dracula so popular still today? Why is that character? Why are there so many remakes? Why does Dracula and vampires appear as analogies for politics, or science, or all sorts of analogies for the vampire? But Dracula as the character, I think Bela was meant to be that role. He was meant to play that character. Just the area of the world that he grew up near Transylvania, he grew up with the folklore very real, with the Roma people in the area. That was part of his childhood, the beliefs in the vampire and how you killed the vampire. So he went on, he wasn't a horror actor on the stage. And so you think, why did he get that role? He had to fight for it for the film, but you think back over a person's life and you think he must have been made to play that role. And the way that he played it, I think Dacre, when you talk about all the other versions, Twilight and the more modern versions, I think really those are a reflection of his portrayal. It's the sexy vampire. It's the beautiful vampire. It's the almost the vampire that can walk among you, and not look monstrous, right? And so that's different from Stoker's story. But I think that version of the vampire is a direct result of Bela's interpretation of it.
Absolutely. And I say this many times, the stage in England and US would never put, in those days, Bram Stoker's Dracula
right
on the stage.
Right.
He didn't, it was when, and when your grandfather put on the tux, the dinner jacket and the medallion and all that, that instantly created, a different look than Bram created. But I don't think he could have. It couldn't have survived, as we all know back in those days.
Right.
It would have been a no-show.
Yeah.
So it had to morph a little bit.
Right.
And what I think is cool, if we can touch on this, because as Chris McAuley's sitting there, we have this kind of conversation a lot. One of the things, Lynne, I recently found was that Oscar Wilde's mother wrote a book about Irish mythology and folklore, and we've got Chris here, who's in Northern Ireland. He knows all these folklores upside down and backwards, so we'll get him to jump in a moment.
I want to find
she
that
actually
book.
wrote a book. Okay, I'll let you know, because there was actually a copy of it in Bram Stoker's library when his library was sold by his wife 2 years after he died, and I've seen the catalog of the books by Christie's, who sold it all off. So it's easy. You can find it and you can see all the books. So I purchased a copy of the book. I didn't purchase that book, that's gone, but the exactly same edition. And it said that, and I think this is where Bram got it, that Lady Jane Wilde said that Irish folklore and superstition have and I'm paraphrasing, have vampires very similar to the ones that Emily Gerard has uncovered in Transylvania. So I'm going to ask Chris in a moment. Chris, what do you know about Irish vampires? Because obviously the Bela vampire comes from what Emily Gerard wrote about in Transylvania. That's part of Bram's notes. That's part of his research. But now it's looking like it was a merger, really, of things he learned about in Ireland. So Chris, give us a little 5-minute tour on Irish folklore and superstition with blood-sucking creatures. It's not all the little leprechauns and pots of gold, is it?
Well, the leprechauns do have something to do with it, because they're evil bastards, and they're not they're not the nice, cute, cuddly little creatures that the Irish tourist board would have you believe. They're part of the Fae folk, and the Fae folk, you don't mess about with them. They are the gods, the gaps. They're the gods, the doorways. Actually part of where Halloween comes from as well, with the knocking on the door and people opening doors and giving gifts to keep the fairies away, to keep the fae folk away. But yeah, I would be convinced that Bram took an awful lot from Irish mythology. Back in the era of the High Kings, there was a tribe called the Children of the Danu, and there was a reptilian tribe that came from the sea called the Fomorians. and the Fomorians came to take over Ireland, and the children of the tribe of Danu fought the Fomorians, and the Fomorians would not die. The only way they could die was through ashwood through the heart and have their head cut off. It's the only way of doing it. The other famous,
familiar.
Yep.
Yeah.
The other sort of story in Irish mythology that kind of relates to this is Abertach, who is a sort of a bloodthirsty Irish tyrant. So there was a group of peasants in County Derry, and they rebelled against this despotic sort of chieftain called Abertach. And with the help of a neighbouring chieftain, they attempted to kill him on multiple occasions. And the operative word here is being attempt. Every time they tried to kill Abertach, and thought he was dead and buried, he rose from the grave and demanded bowls of blood, sort of in recompense. So in a final act of desperation, the tribe, the Celtic chiefman, has to consult a Christian hermit, and the proper remedy for dealing with a member of the Walking Dead is given. So they run him through with a sword made of yew wood, bury him upside down, surround his grave of thorns, and then, for good measure, they top the grave off with a large rock. So this has the sort of the desired effect. Abertach never rises again. Now, if you have a look, James Joyce actually talks about the vampire as well, and he talks about this character. There's a book called The Irish Vampire, which I would urge everybody to read, so you can see a little bit about that. Now, this grave of Abertach still exists in Garva and County Derry today, and every farmer of that field that has tried to move that stone or move the tree that's on top of it has had failure throughout the centuries. So more recently, we've had farmers that have tied rope around a tree and tried to put the rope on the tractor drives off by itself. Farmers trying to cut the tree down with chainsaws. As soon as the chainsaw hits the tree, the chainsaw stops. So there's lots of little things about that story that kind of stand out.
Was that recently?
Those are the recent attempts, but for the last so many hundreds of years, farmers have tried to do this and they can't. There's all sorts of reasons why they can't do it. So it's very, very strange. It's a strange sort of area, you know. Something that's really interesting as well is that there's a memorial sculpture found in an Irish church in St. Patrick's Church of Ireland in Monaghan, which is known as the Parting Glance, and it portrays a woman on her deathbed while her grieving husband is restrained by a friend. And the sculpture is dedicated to one Lucy Ann Westenra.
Oh.
Her husband, Lord Warner William Westenra, which is where we believe that Bram may have got that name from. So that's another sort of link there as well. And Dacre and myself have also been doing little parts of exploration around the cholera epidemic that Bram's mother, Charlotte, had witnessed, and we believe that there's links there with the cholera epidemic in Sligo, with Dracula. So for me, it's really a no-brainer as an Irish person, with Bram Stoker being one of the quintessential Irish writers, that he draws upon the wealth of Irish mythology to create the ultimate vampire. There are also the vampires of the bogs that would drag you down, the bog vampires, and they've become popularized now in the Preacher comic book series or the TV series, where you actually have an Irish vampire called Cassidy, and he gets dragged into a bog in the 1700s and then becomes a vampire. But those creatures exist in Irish mythology. So it's interesting.
So why do you think they that Bram maybe having that background set his story in Transylvania?
Well, as I said earlier, there's no question it was a merger. The one book, I mean, there's 26 books we discovered in the London Library attributed to Bram. and they didn't have the little cards in the back, with the names. It was actually, I think I might have told this to you before. The guy that ran the library found all these strange markings in the margins.
Yes.
And he contacted me and said, Dacre, can you help me verify if these are actually, your great granduncle? Because in the back of Bram's notes that live in Philadelphia Rosenbach Museum, he listed all of his sources, just like a university student doing a paper.
Right, right.
And so he took this book and walked through the aisles of the London Library, and he noticed all 26 books were there. He took them all out, put them onto his cart, brought them back to his office, and started leafing through them, and put little Post-it notes where there were strange little pencil markings, and some of them underlining things, some of them check marking things. And that's when he started looking at the notes themselves and go, oh, he's looking for vampire, he's talking volcano, he's talking trance, he's talking symbolism, all these different books. And it all kind of started coming together. And then he contacted me and another fellow, Robert 18 Basang, that were working on an annotated Dracula. And we had seen the notes, we had seen the typescript, and we put 2 and 2 together, plus the fact that Bram's son had given 2 books of his father's to the London Library after Bram died, and they contained the exact same markings.
Interesting.
So the to answer your question, Lynn, one of the books that Bram saw was, and he mentioned it in the one interview he ever gave, or that's been discovered, about Emily Gerard, who Oscar Wilde's mother mentioned. Transylvanian Superstitions was the essay she wrote. She expanded it into 2 books. Land Beyond the Forest, they were in the London Library. They had check marks and things in it. So I think what he did was everything Chris just told you and their listeners it was included in Bram's consciousness as a young boy. I think these type of stories went into his mother told him, his nanny told him, as well as the cholera epidemic in Sligo. But then he started in earnest writing the book and outlining the book. And I've analyzed these notes to death. I just finished doing 8 sessions in Bram Stoker Festival, hour-and-a-half long sessions dissecting Dracula. So it's very fresh in my mind what he saw, where he saw it, when he saw it, and the progression of the writing. And so when he came across this book by Emily Gerard, he switched the story from being set in Austria. You could see the crossouts, anything to do with Austria and Styria. He switched the name of Count Dracula from Count Vampire to Count Dracula. Because of this Transylvanian Superstitions and one other book by William Wilkinson. So that was, to me, the perfect merger between the Irish vampire, as Chris said, and the Transylvanian one. And so my question back to you is, growing up, what did your father tell you about what your grandfather may have known? Did Bela come to America with some of these superstitions of Transylvanian vampires and Nosferatu and Strigoi? Did that make its way to you as a young girl and terrorize you as a little kid?
No, it really didn't. I mean, we just didn't discuss those kind of things at all. Even with my grandmother, who I was, had a nice relationship with, we didn't talk about my grandfather almost at all, other than maybe he mentioned that, he was an actor and he played all these roles in Dracula.
Yeah.
But I was young. I wouldn't have thought to ask those things. But, my dad did like reading us stories, but we didn't ever read, he never read us any Dracula stories or vampire stories like that. So, in fact, the only story that I have appears in the biography that will be released soon, and that is just Bela talking about, it's a quote that he was talking about how could he and his father kind of butted heads on what he should do in his life. His father wanted him to be a businessman, go to school. Bela wanted to be an actor, and so they butted heads on that. And at one point Bela said, how can I even take him seriously when he believes in these silly superstitions like vampires and that? So, so he obviously knew about them, and his family obviously, retold the stories or had some sort of belief in them. So that's all I can relate to that, as far as what Bela might have thought about that folklore.
Well, it's interesting because, the folklore, and Paul, you asked this probably about 20 minutes ago, and Lynne just joggled this question: is why is Dracula the quintessential monster. And one of my thoughts that I've shared with people over the years, and somebody, in one of these interviews said, geez, Frankenstein and the Invisible Man and the Swamp Monster and the Mothman, all these other guys, kind of come out of really interesting imagination. But Dracula comes out of perceived reality.
Yeah.
And it is so deep and thick in hundreds of cultures. And Bram Stoker, in that one interview I mentioned, discovered 13 of them because he mentioned them in that interview. And so when Chris and I do all of our research and our writing in the games and everything we do in the Stokerverse, we go back to some of these cultures and go, okay, what's in France? What's in Greece? What's in Germany? What's, in the Asian countries? What's here? What's there? So it's really quite interesting because Bram laid that out for us in that one interview, that many of these cultures believed in these things. And of course, it makes sense.
Right.
Medicine could not explain it. Science couldn't explain it.
Yeah.
Religion couldn't explain the fact that people were being perceived to come out of the grave and sucking life from the others, when in fact, for the listeners that don't know it, it's all about germ theory and people not understanding contagious disease. And they would, wrap it up in their mind as a superstition or folklore about the spirit of the dead in some form or another coming out and taking the life. So when you think of the monster that evolved from that, and then each country sprinkling him with their own sort of local theories and local thoughts, that's why the monster appears so real. And he's real in your mind because we worry about death. He's real in your thoughts because immortality is not such a bad thing if you think about it. For some, it might be more attractive than others, but because that monster has such a interesting sort of vibe and touching a nerve on reality, that's why I think he continues to go on and on and on. We don't get tired of him because it's a real thought. It's a real issue.
And I think too, of course, Bela playing it on the stage, he reached a lot of people. It was, 33 weeks on Broadway. So this story reached a lot of people, but it wasn't until he brought it to the Universal film that not all people might have known the history or known the folklore, but now they had this monster to be worried about, that how did you kill it? How did you deal with it? Could he be walking among us and us not even knowing it? So I think it because Bela was the one that brought it to the screen in that way, it had a huge impact on culture, right? On viewers.
Well, it also had a huge impact on book sales because I think people, this is what and again, McAuley will give you a chance. I'm sorry, buddy. But, we know that the sales of the books skyrocketed near the end of the time on stage and then on screen, because people then go out of interest. Oh, yeah. What's this all about anyway?
Right.
And they go back and read it. So sorry, Chris, I cut you off, man.
No, you're fine. One of the interesting things about Dracula is it's a very theological book. And it presents a theological problem. So, from Genesis, Leviticus, Galatians, you're not to drink blood because blood is a propitiation of life. You're not supposed to take it. Now, whenever I always ask people, and the answer to this, Dacre, but I always ask people, why is silver so unattractive to vampires? What is it? Very few people realize that it's Judas Iscariot. It's the 30 pieces of silver. Likewise, the cross, the Christian cross, it's a symbol of the sun. It's an equinox. When Christ dies, the sun disappears. And interestingly enough, when Christ dies, the dead rise from the grave. That happens in the Bible. There are theological themes that run through Dracula as well. They're very, very, very powerful. And I think that resonates still with people. I think those old stories, those old conundrums, those old theological truths still reside, still resonate very powerfully. And I grew up with Bela's interpretation and loved it. And I grew up with Christopher Lee's as well. Those were my two favorites.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's I think that Dracula, personally, I don't think Dracula was survived without them. I think Dracula had to change, and yeah, it had to change. The character had to change to fit the audience that would be receptive to it.
Yeah.
But in each of the portrayals, those truths that we're talking about, the myths, the theology, all of it, they all bleed through in some way or another.
Yeah.
So that within popular consciousness, we do have this complete composite of Dracula. And I find that personally fascinating. I think that's why it survived. It survived through, with the original text, survived through the actor's portrayal. But this pop cultural composite, which resides with all of us, because if you say Dracula, you'll get at least 6 or 7 different things that come from the mythologies and all the stories and all the films.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an incredible thing. Very few literary characters have that.
Right. Yeah.
And yet, when you consider that Bram Stoker wrote the novel and only included Dracula's voice like 25% of the time, and it's funny, many people say that, oh, Van Helsing is the most popular character in the novel, and I've because he's so present in the novel.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, Dracula exists in all those characters, the central characters, the band of heroes. He exists in their minds in different iterations for about half the book, and then until they finally figure out who he is, with the help of Mina. So it's a very, not only is it a theologic book, it's a feminist book. Bram Stoker's mother was a huge impact on him, as was his sister, and I think that Mina is the mother personified, the female activist, the modern woman, and so she is the one that is the glue that keeps everyone together. And Bram is really putting that point of view strongly very forward when Van Helsing says, you there are lights and there are darknesses, you are the light of all lights. She's the one that used the typewriter, she's the one that figures out what's going on. And then that Dracula character becomes more understood in the story, but still he exists in everyone's thoughts and worries and concerns. And again, that's why I think he's so adaptable to so many different types of images. And even from Orlok to your grandfather to Christopher Lee, and then if you skyrocket forward to Luke Evans, or even, any of you guys seen The Last Voyage of the Demeter yet?
No, I haven't seen it yet.
So I do want to touch on that here in a little bit. Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll let you get back to it but Lynne, I highly recommend it. It's a throwback. It's a throwback to what's chapter 7 of Dracula, but the Dracula in it goes way back to even Orlok and worse.
Right. Well, so that's what when Legendary Comics decided to do the graphic novel of Dracula starring Bela Lugosi, there was that big discussion, because in the book, and it's a very good adaptation, right, of the novel in graphic novel form, and we went back and forth on what Bela should look like. Should he look like the image that everybody has of him, or should we try to make him look like Stoker's description? And the description is pretty vague, actually, other than the long, the white beard and the long robes. So we kind of did a mashup of that with Bela, not in a tuxedo, but in the long robes with the long fingernails, and we aged him from the beginning of the book to the end. He got younger, so we tried to do that, but it was difficult because
you gave him fangs,
and
which
we gave
is
him
interesting,
fangs, which he never wore in any of his portrayals of Dracula.
Now I understand that. Is it true? I mean, maybe you can sort of come clean on this myth. Is it because the censors were tough on the films and the stage, or was it a personal choice because he couldn't speak so well with the fangs on?
I actually, in hearing people speak about Jack Pierce and his makeup and Bela's portrayal, I've never heard that they even crafted fangs for him. I've
Right.
never heard that. I know that they only show blood when Renfield pricks his finger, but that's
Right.
the only blood. And I think part of that was they could only show a certain amount
Yeah.
of gore.
I think it was 1958 when they had blood on Christopher Lee's mouth. Chris
Uh-huh.
McAuley, wasn't that the time when the censorship allowed blood on the guy's mouth?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the Dacre and I are writing this like encyclopedic book on vampire cinema at the minute, and it is a labor of love. And I can tell you, yeah, it was 58, mate. You're 100% right.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of years after 1931.
Yeah, no, that's right. So
Yeah, but
sorry,
I
we've
wanted
been
to touch a little bit too, on not just maybe when we're talking about the classic monsters, not just necessarily Bram Stoker's book, but I think that from my perspective, talking to not only fans of Bela but fans of the classic monsters, there's something relatable to the monsters to people, whether people feel like an outcast in some way. They can relate to this. They can relate to the monster's struggle. Like, in Dracula, Bela says, to be dead, to be really dead, how glorious, So you can tell that there's some struggle here that, maybe he doesn't want to be the undead. He doesn't want to. So I think that and of course with Frankenstein's monster, people relate to this monstrous side or this being an outcast. And then that's one side. And then one completely different, draw to especially Bela's character and to Dracula and vampires is it's sexy. And I think too, that's why, Bela had a lot of fans that were women, and still to this day, there's equal people that love Bela are both men and women.
The swoon factor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So more so, like, I think with I don't see it as much maybe, and I'm not as into it of like the creature, or the monster. I think a lot more women are fans of Bela and Dracula.
Well, and for different reason. I mean, who would really want to sort of have a wonderful candlelight dinner and dance a waltz with Frankenstein or the Swamp Thing?
Right.
With Bela, that's what it is. That's what everyone sort of looks for, even though it might end with a little bit of bloodshed and a little bit of immortality. It is sexier. But no, you're right. That's a key element. And again, Chris and I have talked about this. Even my cousins, Bram's great grandsons, talk about how sexy was the novel, and as a matter of fact, it was fairly pretty risque when back in the day, late 1800s, you have a woman sort of exposing that neck and sort of the blood exchange, that sort of thing,
right?
And even the fact that Lucy is fairly promiscuous, when Mina is not. That was sort of a risque part that Bram brought to it. And so in the 31, you had those the three brides, in their kind of sheer negligees, and you go on later on that. My God, when Ingrid Pitt is wearing this negligee, there's not much to the imagination underneath all that stuff.
Yeah.
As I've listened now to the backstory of like the Irish folklore and some of the basically where Bram was getting all of his notes, I think to touch on Chris's point about Dracula needed to change and adapt, I think part of what has made him this long lasting character is he truly is the like quintessential melting pot monster, because there is so much taken from everywhere and just people keep adding to it. It's funny because you take Frankenstein's monster, who is literally a pile of parts,
Yep.
and doesn't really have the longevity that Dracula, who is just metaphorically a pile of parts, has. You know, I mean, you take the Irish folklore, you put it to a Transylvanian backdrop, and you have a much darker image than you would have had than just playing with imagery. You know, because when people picture Transylvania, it's automatically darker than what people picture as Ireland. You know, Ireland's green and flowing, and you know, Transylvania is just always dark. You know, no matter how you picture it, it's just always dark. You know, it's not true, but that's how you picture it. You know?
Sure, that's the image we have of it. I'm sure the Romanian tourist board would love to hear that.
So they've got to hate it, but you know,
that's what get people to go there, though.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not allowed to go there. I'm actually banned. I can't go there.
Why can't you go there?
So there's the I have. This is a funny thing about me, right? So I can't wear silver because it actually warps. So silver rings and stuff warp my skin.
Uh-huh.
I have a serious garlic allergy.
Yes. The sunlight burns them.
And it doesn't burn me; it just turns my skin slightly grey. It doesn't sparkle or anything. So I've got all these sort of strange sort of the conditions, and most of it is because I'm Irish. Like the Irish don't necessarily have the gene to. We don't eat a lot of garlic. We actually, honestly, use garlic to wall up graves. So there's another reason why garlic was used in Dracula. We didn't use a lot of it in our food. It wasn't something I grew up with. So I didn't have the enzymes basically to process it. But then a Romanian friend of mine finds out all this, and then it's like you can't go to Romania. You can't ever go.
There's no protection, man. There's no protection.
Well, it's still taken very seriously. I mean, the interesting thing is, you know, that she has an effigy of Vlad the Impaler, who's a saint, a Catholic saint in Romania. She's got an effigy of that in one of her rooms. It's all taken incredibly seriously when you think about the Romanian thing about it. But yeah, there you go. There's a fact about me that I have all these things, and that's why I can't go to Romania. So Romanian tourist board must love me.
that's great.
Well, Dacre and I will take you virtually on the tour with us.
That's right. We'll go there with little cameras, with our little cameras on our heads. And we'll send it back to you, Chris.
That's it. Sounds good.
And then you just show up on a blank screen. Really screw with them.
Well, listen, I was there last year with Victoria Price and her fan group, and we had a great time. The weather would have been good for you, Chris, because there was about probably half the time it was, you know, we were up in the mountains, though. It was very cool, cloudy, misty. We actually went to the location in the Kalamani National Park, northeastern Transylvania, right by the Moldavian border, ironically about 30 miles past the Borgo Pass. That was the location where Bram actually set his fictional castle Dracula there. And we hiked up into the mountains there. And, you know, one of the things that I do, Lynn, a lot like you, is, you know, protect your dad's grandfather's legacy. And I've placed a plaque up on the side of this volcano with the permission from the government to say this is the location based on Bram's notes of his fictional castle Dracula. There is no castle there, but there certainly was a volcano. So I don't know. It never, this stuff that Chris and I deal with are things that were taken out of the typescript, taken out of the notes, little known facts. But I'll share one with you now, is that the original ending of the novel was going to involve a volcanic eruption. And so it's right after in the novel when the band of heroes actually stab the Count with a Bowie knife and slit his throat, a volcano would have erupted. And Bram Stoker was so detail oriented in everything he did in life, being a clerk in Petty Sessions legal department and theatrical manager, that he did the research and found an extinct volcano in the northeastern part of the country, very near the Warrego Pass, called Mount Israel, and that's his location. He had to get it just right.
Right.
So imagine if, and this may shock you, but if everything went according to plan, we don't know who actually cut out this ending, either Bram or his editor.
Yeah.
It could have been a very definitive ending for Dracula,
right?
And not that story wouldn't have continued, but further Draculas and Stoker McAuley bringing him back in our graphic novels.
It would have been harder
Return.
to do if he had been burned up in a volcano.
Absolutely. As it is, we've got some pretty cool creative ways to utilize that volcano to our advantage, as authors so do.
Yeah.
But it was interesting, and those are kind of cool things we find out. I'm wondering, Lynne, if I may, can you share with us any really cool inside stories on your grandfather and his life? How he got out of the country, and how I know it wasn't easy for him to get established here as an actor, was it?
Wow. Well, I'll have to. That is a story. I don't know if it's a story for this interview, but he had to escape his country, Hungary, under threat of death. He found himself on the wrong side of the government, and he was a wanted guy. So he didn't leave Hungary of his own choice. He was married at the time, and they fled the country, within hours of being warned that they were on this blacklist, and went to Germany and made films there, and then came to this country via Italy, Trieste, Italy, on a cargo ship.
Wow.
Yeah, so he came in through New Orleans and declared his status of needing to come into the country for political reasons, and he made his way up to New York and found the Hungarian community there, and eventually officially immigrated through Ellis Island.
Oh boy! So I didn't know that. That's interesting that New Orleans was his first port of call.
Yeah, he had to. On the ship that he was on, he was a crewman, and some of the other people felt very strongly that he was his political views were not theirs, as far as his history of being an organizer, union organizer, an activist in Hungary, and who he was affiliated with at the time. And so he had to hide out in the ship. They had a few people on the ship that helped him hide from these other angry crew members. And when they got into New Orleans harbor, they helped him get off the side and into a little dinghy boat, and he went out, and the Coast Guard found him, and he said, "Gosh, take me."
Paul, that's a great segue into Last Voyage of the Demeter, isn't it?
I was going to say, let me get this straight. He not only played Dracula, he came here, stowed away on a cargo ship.
In the ship. I mean, come on.
Yeah, and apparently it was a pretty rough seas getting there, so it wasn't a pleasant trip.
Oof, God. That's amazing, Paul. So if I didn't lead you into the Last Voyage of the Demeter, I don't know what did. So
this was a blockbuster year for Dracula. I mean, 2 movies came out in 2023. It was Renfield and Last Voyage of the Demeter.
I did see Renfield, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was entertaining.
And both of them, and this is where I got the idea for this episode, tie back to, obviously Demeter ties directly to the Stoker family, but they both tie to both families. Renfield, Nicolas Cage's Dracula, is a variation on Bela's Dracula. So that was really interesting to see. Like, it was a modern, basically fast forward modern time. It was Bela's Dracula in modern age. So,
but in New Orleans, just as Lynne said, I mean, that's the thing. It's in New Orleans, and here he is in New Orleans in the show, in the movie.
Yeah,
I thought that I didn't know when I saw it for the first time. I didn't know that that's where it took place, and so I thought that was very interesting. And I was wondering if whoever wrote the script had read at least the original biography to know that that's where he came in through.
And then we have Curse of the Demeter, and it's you do see a much darker Dracula, much more like Orlockian style. It's not the suave, sexy vampire that you're used to seeing when you see Dracula. It's more bat-like, more very much more Nosferatu style. Until the end.
Right.
The very end.
Don't spoil it now. Hold on.
Ruining it for me?
Hold on. He's going to be careful. I know he is.
No, it's okay. I'm curious now.
Well, obviously, he survives the trip. But when you see Dracula later, there is he looks very similar to the Bela design. So he went from the vampire, just this dark creature of the night, to, all right, now I need to blend in with people. Now I'll be suave, I'll be sophisticated, and you get shades of Bela, you get shades of the 31 Dracula, and you're just like, what? Why is this still happening? I mean, I love it, don't get me wrong.
So even more of a transformation than the Coppola film.
Yeah. It was great to see. Here we are, God, how many years later, and that's still the archetype.
Mm-hmm.
When Dracula has to, fit in with upper crust London, it's Bela Lugosi. It threw me.
Yeah, interesting. Who better?
I like the film. Actually, a funny thing happened to me. A friend of mine, Aaron Sagers, who does a lot of interviewing people, he said, Dacre, I just had a chat with people at NBC Universal, and because of the actors' strike and the writers' strike, there can be no promotion for this. And this is in August. And so he said, would you be interested in talking to these people and doing a screening? So I live near Augusta, Georgia. I'm in the South Carolina side. So they contact me, said, get 20 or 30 of your friends and head on over that movie theater next week, and we'll get a private screening for you, and we'd love you guys to comment on it. And so it was like, okay. And I'm told, like, with a day to go what time it's going to be and what theater. It was all very sort of last minute. And it was really quite cool, guys, because I have not been in a movie theater since COVID. And so I didn't realize, some of these places have really big, comfortable chairs, with the, like lazy boy chairs that extend. Oh my God, it was wonderful. And it was just like 12 of us in this great theater. It was a very dark, claustrophobic kind of feel. And as we discussed afterwards, we all knew the book and just wondered how close it was going to be to the novel. Since chapter 7 is the voyage of the Demeter, and you get little bits and pieces of the ship's log. So there's not a whole lot to go on, but we all knew what the ending should be. We just didn't know if it was going to be that way, because, many movies do stray from the book. In this case, it stayed fairly close to it. And I thought it was good. The thing that really irritated me, how nowadays movies are judged on how well they do on the first weekend in the box office. And then it's like so easy to just diss it because, it only made $34 million. And, Barbie made $84 million. And it's like, okay. Does that make it a bad movie? That's the easy poaching
Right.
for that. And it was like, give this a chance. It's classic horror, like our family's life, Lynn. Like give it some longevity. It's not going to be a flash in the pan. And then I see that about a month later it's gone on streaming. So hopefully it'll have another life there.
Well, and I thought it was weird that they went for an August release and not like September, October.
That's the question.
So close to Renfield, right? Wasn't it?
And they're so different. You're right.
Yeah.
It's like
night and day. It was two very different Dracula movies, and it's one. Renfield was happy and campy, a little actiony, and it was kind of like an action comedy. And then you have the Demeter, which is horror, like a very classic horror movie. And you can't put those back to back.
Yeah.
There has to be some breathing room between those two movies. One of them is bound to fail, and they were both amazing movies.
Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing it now, but maybe it's a question of, will The Last Voyage of the Demeter have longevity as far as streaming? How many people watch that rather than go back and watch Renfield?
Well, and I also think the strike hurt it as well, because you couldn't promote it.
Right.
And it also had a distribution problem in UK.
Yep.
Like it was supposed to. I don't think it's ever been out there yet. I don't know. Chris, do you know if because I know for about the first month it couldn't go to the UK.
Yeah, it didn't go to the UK. No, massive distribution issues. I mean that caused a problem. And then people lost interest. I think that was another problem. People, it could see a new lease of life on DVD. And some of these films do, I remember when I watched it, I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was an interesting take on it all. I mean, you're seeing the bestial side of Dracula's film. It's something like we're really looking at in the Stokerverse is that really dark, animalistic, evil narcissist. Like there's no light in Dracula at all. There's nothing there. He is an evil narcissist who is pretty much a monster. He's incredibly intelligent. Don't get me wrong. He's the spider that kind of traps people in his web. But it's that almost pure evil form that you see in the Demeter that comes up, and I think that's very powerful because we haven't seen that. We have not seen that in a long time. I mean, I personally am not scared of Dracula in any of the films, but if you encountered something like that creature that was coming for you, and and then in the night, in the dark, that was coming for you, and it was relentless. And it's some very powerful imagery and great cinematography in that film as well.
And you could feel all the creaking of the boards of the ship. Apparently, they made some massive set in Malta to make that happen. I read an interview with the director, and it was not easy. They had to do some CGI, but nowadays it's all about it's great, the CGI was amazing, these car wrecks and everything else, or oh god, all it is CGI. So it's hard to satisfy everybody. I think what it comes down to, what it really comes down to is good acting, good story arc, and good tension.
And the acting was on point. The spaced, I think they spaced the kills out perfectly. And the way they did them were amazing. They took you as a viewer on that ride. You're invested with the characters. there's a couple that, and since Lynn, you haven't seen it,
No, go ahead.
you don't want to see go, but they
Uh-huh.
ultimately end up going, and it's gut wrenching.
Mm.
Yeah,
You
it
know,
is. You feel for them.
And
Yeah.
for me, that's the mark of a good movie or a good story. When they can pull you in that well to where when the character goes, you're just it just hits you right in the gut.
Mm-hmm.
That is solid direction. And I had originally tried to line up an interview about a month or two after the movie came out with the gentleman that played the first mate, David Dismalchin. He's been on the show before. We've become pretty solid friends. But due to the strike, we can't talk. I couldn't have him on, and it sucked because I was really happy he got this role. Because he's a huge classic monster fan. He just loves classic horror. He grew up on the Universal stuff and movie monsters, and so this is almost like a dream role for him, and he can't talk about it anywhere. I felt so bad for him.
Oh, that's terrible.
It's like I can't wait for the everything to be cleared so he can finally go out and talk about this role of a lifetime.
Well, then maybe it'll have a resurgence then when people can talk about it. Right. Wow. Well, I mean, it's, just the fact that we're having this discussion today in 2023 when when was the book written?
1897, so 127 years ago. Yeah.
And the Dracula film was 93 years ago. I mean, that speaks in and of itself to whatever the reasons are behind it, the power of this character, the power of Bela's portrayal.
And here we are all that many years later, and both camps have new things coming out. Let's start with Dacre and Chris. Let's talk about the Stokerverse. Where all did that stem from?
Well, Chris had this great idea and contacted me a couple of years ago and said, "Look, we got to take the Stokerverse. We got to take Bram Stoker's Dracula and create a universe around it because it's all disconnected. There's so many different directions, and let's pull it back together and create a range of products where it hasn't gone. Obviously, literary, it's done quite well, but of course, I'd already done the prequel and the sequel, and Chris was really into games, graphic novels, audio stories, and so he said, "Look, I've got experience and background in this area. Are you willing to go there? I've got great contacts." And lo and behold, Chris, give them the rundown. What have we got to date? Because some of them are right behind my shoulder. And
so we've got a graphic novel called The Virgin's Embrace, which is a revamp of Bram Stoker's short story The Squaw. I have to apologize for anybody who gets offended by the original title. It was of its time. We have an all-star audio drama called Voices of Dracula, so let's get some Doctor Who actors and Hollywood actors in there. We have a novel called Dracula's Bedlam, which is set in the asylum and takes place during Dracula, but we've also got characters like Jack the Ripper and other little characters in there that we've put in, new characters. We have our Dracula The Return, which is our graphic novel series. Issue 1 is out and issue 2 is on Zoop now for our funding campaign. So go and grab that. You will find out how Dracula returns and see how he is doing all his dastardly deeds to gain revenge on the band of heroes that stopped him the first time. We've also got a RPG game that's been a runaway success, bestseller. It's behind Dacre there. It's been a bestseller in all the various gaming conventions in the UK, Europe, and it is now in America. We have a miniature war game that came out where you can play in Dracula's universe, a little bit like Warhammer. So little miniature figures and stuff like that with some new campaigns, and one campaign that was written by Dacre and myself based on some elements of Dracula that were removed from the original book. And we have a upcoming video game coming out next year. You can grab a demo of that at Incubate. So it's INCUB8 games. And if you search for Dracula Dark Reign, you will be able to download the demo. And we have more coming out in the next couple of years, but yeah, that's enough. That's probably enough to say for now, right?
Absolutely.
I'm trying to take notes really fast.
I'll
It's
send
been
them
fun
to you.
work on this stuff. It's the whole idea is bringing back, bits and pieces that Bram left out or was in his notes that didn't make its way into the novel, and just sort of keep things alive in that universe. Even characters that, like, for instance, Arthur Conan Doyle was a very good friend of Bram's. So we integrate some of the things in Sherlock Holmes universe, based on the research that we found, how these guys are connected. So yeah, Stokerverse is alive and well and bringing back Bram Stoker's Dracula.
That's
Now,
awesome.
I do want to ask the video game. What's the play style like? Like, what's the video game?
It's Metroidvania. It's essentially a Metroidvania game. Yeah, there's those elements to it. So you start off as Jonathan Harker. You're escaping the castle, and that's the prologue. And then we move forward into World War I.
Because the reason I asked is, as you're growing the Stokerverse and with as popular as everything is, there's been this kind of boom in, like you saw it with the Friday the 13th game, now the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game, where you can pit, essentially, for like the Friday the 13th game, it was the counselors trying to escape Jason, or so you played as the counselors or as Jason. I think something like that set in the world of Dracula would be phenomenal, where you can play as Dracula or as some of the characters that people know and love, trying to take out Dracula or escape Dracula. Would be an amazing platform video game.
Well, you never know, Paul. Let's see what happens in the future.
Well, right.
Yeah.
Just
There are things
as you're talking about all this, is like, man, that'd be cool.
There are things in the works that, when you sign an NDA, we can't talk about some of the stuff.
Right.
So we'll just say, we'll take it under advisement, Paul. We'll put it that way, okay?
Right.
Okay.
And Lynne,
Yeah.
you guys are working on a very, very cool, like the essential Lugosi legacy biography.
Yes. It's been a long time in the making for the author, for sure, because he first released a book with my dad and grandmother's permission and assistance in 1976. And it just didn't really get the distribution that it required, or actually deserved, for various reasons, mishaps with the publisher at the time. But it also had a restriction on the page count and how many photos could be included. And so, as I started working with my dad and running the Lugosi business and trying to do some other legacy projects, it just kept coming back to me that in reading other people's biographies, which were really, really good. I mean, there's some that are very well researched and factual, and others that have perpetuated, rumors, falsehoods, misinformation. So I really wanted Robert Kramer's book to get out there, because he spent so much time with my grandmother, and he has interviews that nobody else has, from Bela's family, friends, and colleagues, that really tells the story of who Bela was. And so we finally found a publisher who could publish it in the way that we wanted, which would be a beautiful hardcover, oversized book with lots of pictures. So I had the honor of curating those pictures, which now there's over 700. And so it tells his story in pictures as well as in text. And in fact, we have a lot of people helped us out, and Dacre gave a wonderful interview to the author and shared with us some documents that would help tell the story of Bram Stoker's book as it kind of related to Bela's growing up and the folklore that he was exposed to.
It's awesome. Well,
yeah, and in addition to that, we have our pretty robust licensing program. So we have a lot of different toys, figures, shirts, things that help us keep Bela as a legacy alive with fans. And it's been really fun for me. I enjoy working with the licensees because most of them are fans, and so their products are just really great. In fact, Dacre said he just bought the ornament that was recently released.
Unprompted, Lynn, unprompted.
Yeah.
I just thought it was so cool.
Yeah.
And I bought 3 of them because my 2 kids think it's pretty cool, and they've got grandchildren, so I think just the perfect Bela with the wings up there. And then, shameless plug, you get to take the thing off the tree and put it on a little stand magnetically for the rest of the year. So brilliant marketing and great licensing. Good for you, Lynn.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, I wanted to touch also on, it's, part of my trying to keep document the family history and Bela's filmography. We are trying to acquire as many of Bela's films on film, whether it's 16 millimeter or 35 millimeter. And we've donated those films to the Bela Lugosi collection at the Academy Film Library. So it's my goal. I know a lot of other libraries have copies or better copies maybe, but I want to have all of, as much as I can, of his film work in one place. And I think that's important for the history to have that together. So I've been working on that. And then of course, I think Dacre knows, and Paul, you might know, that the cape that was with the family, my grandfather's screen-worn cape, is now at the Academy Museum, and hopefully will be exhibited soon. But that was cool. A big deal for the family, but we're able to feel like it will be shared with the world now. And we replicated that cape in a costume version, and it's absolutely beautiful. It is a true replica of the cape. And when we take it places and let people try it on, just Paul, like you were saying, when people put the cape over their eyes and they say the words in Bela's voice, people just become him. They just his vibe comes through that cape, even though it's a costume cape. So that's really been a fun project to have that available to people.
Yeah, no, it's great. And guys, this has been, I couldn't have asked for a better episode. It's been educational. It's been fun. Chris, glad I got to meet you. I want to have you on a couple more times, so we're going to talk.
That sounds ominous. Ominous, doesn't it? Like, I want to have you on a couple of times. But yeah, that's grand. No problems.
Yeah, no, it's like, as you were talking, I was like, I have a couple ideas for a couple episodes with you, so I'll shoot you a message. Lynne, Dacre, you both know how much I love you, and it's, I've had you on separately. It's great to have you on together after, connecting the two of you and everything. It's, sharing the love for all things classic horror and everything for your family. And before we wrap this up, why don't you guys tell people where they can find the products? Dacre, you want to go first?
Yeah, well, Chris and I have started Stokerverse.com. That's our newest website. I've also got BramStokerEstate.com, where my books are. And you can also follow me on Facebook, Dacre Stoker Author, and Instagram, Dacre Stoker Author.
And Lynne, where can everyone find all things Lugosi?
Yeah, well, we try to promote any licensed products on Instagram and Facebook, and that's Facebook is Bela Lugosi Official, and Instagram is Real Bela Lugosi. And then right now there's a Kickstarter going for the biography that they're offering just beautiful deluxe edition copies and really, really cool extras that you'll only be able to get during the Kickstarter. So that is live now on Kickstarter. And the name of the book is Bela Lugosi, The Man Behind the Cape. And so you can search that and find more information. The author and I have been doing some interviews, and those are out on social media and some of the fan websites too.
And listeners, of course, those links will all be in the episode description. And you can find me and other great podcasters over at electronicmediacollective.com. Or if you're just looking for me, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and now YouTube at Moose Media Inc. Just look for the Moose. Like I said, guys, I couldn't have asked for a better 100th episode. This has been more than I could have hoped for, and I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to hang out today.
Well, Paul, thank you. I mean, if it weren't for you and people like you that take the time and that have the interest in interviewing us and helping us extend the legacy of my grandfather and Bram Stoker's book, we wouldn't be where we are without you. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well said. I couldn't say it better. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Very much for all your interest. All right.
And until next time, Horror Hounds, mash on.